Hello everybody, this is Gregory with How I Lost Over 100 Pounds and have kept it off for 30 plus years, where there should be no hesitance in your weight loss and in your weight maintenance. Today we're going to continue the series Reflections of a Weight Loss Warrior and talk about my second weight gain of the 30 plus year weight loss that coincided with my father's death. Now before we begin, if you need help with weight loss, contact me through the Clarity FM link found here in the episode notes. Also check out my website, it's got a lot of articles and recipes that you might find useful. Naturopathic Earth. Check out my podcast, The Awakened Man. Check out my books. And if you appreciate my content, the littlest thing you can do is just hit a couple buttons. Like, sub, notification button. And if you really like my content, there's a link for PayPal. All right, so I mentioned in Reflections number 5, I think, in my college years, that I had 3 times where I gained weight after my weight loss in 1991. The first one coincided with the end of my college life. I didn't know what to do. I was kind of like in that quarter life crisis, as they call it. And this is the second one. So we're now in 2008. We're 17 years after my weight loss. I mentioned 2 episodes before in the Invisible Years that the knots were kind of just a time that nothing really big happened. I did talk about dropping out of PhD school. I guess it's kind of big, and that was in 2003. But it was just a lot of calorie in, calorie out. There was just a lot of working out and then having disordered eating, typically binging in the car and hiding it from my then wife. And then my dad died unexpectedly in 2008. He had an aneurysm. I do talk about my father in Confessions of an Obese Child, I think 15, the Jekyll and Hyde father, so I'm not going to really talk about it that much here. But luckily I did have, but before he died, we made amends. And because early on, or when I was fat in my teenage years, and even afterwards, I would blame him for being fat. I'd blame my parents. Why'd you let me eat? Why didn't you ever punish me? Why didn't you hide the food? And it was that kind of like victim mentality that we talked about before. And it's just like, it's negative and it's useless. We all have to be accountable for what we do when we put in our mouth. We're all dealt a different deck of cards. And at that point, before he died, I sat down and I said, look, I know you did the best that you could. I know you had your own demons, and I love you no matter what. So I was lucky to have that conversation with him. He was at a taqueria, because again, we're Mexican, one morning, and he just, his aneurysm, which he knew was large. An aneurysm is when typically an artery, normally it's the aorta, is widening and it's about to burst. Well, it burst. And he knew about it. He had CAT scans. He knew it was going to happen eventually. And he had just flown back from Venice, because he does a lot of international conferences, and probably that transatlantic flight didn't help. So the next morning he's at a taqueria, boom, it happens. They rush him to the hospital. My brother lives in town in Houston, so he was able to see him before he went into a coma. By the time I got there, he was in a coma, and he was in a coma for 2 weeks, and then he passed away. And it was tough. So I never really dealt with death in my life. My grandparents mostly were dead or died when I was very young. And it was a tough death, because my father was a very strong, charismatic personality. I talk about in that Jekyll and Hyde episode. And he was very loved, very well respected. The funeral was packed because he not only was a doctor, but he was a professor of medicine. So he taught at probably the largest medical school in Texas for 20-something years. So a lot of his former students came to the funeral, and it was tough. And I said some words. I think I did the readings at the mass. And then, during that week, and everybody handles death differently, but I think men were just kind of like, let's just get through the week. Nope, don't feel emotions, da-da-da-da-da. I think women may be more apt to feel emotions during that time. But for me, I think I cried one time at the wake, the night before where they show the body, when my cousin flew in, and I guess I didn't know she was coming in, and I just kind of broke down and cried. And that was really the only time. And so afterwards, I went back to the city where I lived. And, not surprisingly, I ate my emotions. And so I think I just did more disordered eating. I kept exercising. But look, if you're ingesting 5,000 calories a day, there's only so much calorie out that you can do. And so within a month or 2, my wife had told me that I gained a decent amount of weight. It was probably like 20, 25 pounds from what my base was. And at that point, I was like, oh, yeah. Because, if we're avoiding mirrors, which I've talked about doing all the time, and we could just make justifications and excuses for a bunch of stuff. And I avoid mirrors because of the bloopy back then. I didn't want to look at my abdomen. So it was pretty much an act of charity that she told me that I was gaining weight. And so I was like, oh. And luckily, the blue B in where I gain weight, which is typically my abdomen, the thing is, those are fat cells that never go away, but they shrink when I eat well, and they get bigger when I don't eat well. So I can lose weight relatively quickly because of those adipose cells. If those adipose cells would have dissolved, and this is what happens when you lose weight pretty young, then I wouldn't have to worry about it as much. But I will always have these things. So I guess the good thing is that I can lose weight relatively quickly with the willpower because these cells shrink. So within 2-3 months, I would say I was back to my normal base weight of, I don't know, size 34 waist. I never weighed myself throughout the post-weight loss time, and maybe I should do an episode on that. And then, within 3 months, I was pretty much back to normal. And like when I gained weight in Alaska, I think the Alaska one was maybe a little longer, but I lost the weight again. So look, in your weight loss journey, this is going to happen, with many people, not everybody, but this is going to happen, especially as you're losing the weight longer. We know the statistic that 90% of people who lose more than 50 pounds gain it back or gain back more. And there's a reason, because they're crash dieting. But just by sheer numbers, the longer you're maintaining in your life, there's a better chance you're going to have these spikes. And so when my father died, that was one of those spikes. Now my mother is alive. She's 82. She's going to die, clearly. And we'll see how I handle that. But I think I'll probably be better equipped to handle it because my father was a sudden death, and it was the first death. And I think that when the second ones come, or other people it's different. Like one of my children died or something like that. Who knows? You can just go off the deep end there. And the good thing is that when my father died, I didn't turn to alcohol, and I would attribute this to a couple of things. I talked about how he had a drinking issue, and so children of alcoholics go one of two ways: either they don't drink or they just drink. But I really have to credit it to my ex-wife, because my ex-wife didn't drink. So there was really no temptation to drink. We didn't have alcohol in the house. And it's not like I was the type that was going to go to a liquor store and just grab a wine and drink it, because I'd rather eat 4 cheeseburgers, to be honest. But I think that helped. And I think that no matter what kind of tumult comes in my life later in my life, I don't think I'll ever turn to alcohol or drugs. If anything, it's probably just going to go back to my bad behavior. But I'm definitely more equipped, my bad behavior of eating. But I'm definitely more equipped now than I was 15 years ago to deal with it, because I've purged these demons, and I don't have that disordered relationship with food. But it was a difficult time. And if any of you have lost a parent or a spouse, it can be a difficult time. And if it happens and it's coming up, and of course you don't know when it's going to happen, just do a lot of journaling, a lot of introspection, know your emotions, know why you're doing things. That way you don't catch yourself 3 months later and you've gained all your weight back. Guys, post in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.